here not to talk about music, but to talk about milk. Because I'm joined by the man we think of as our industrial history correspondent, Mark Amis. Mark, welcome back, sir.
Good morning, Robert.
Now, I didn't know what you were doing today because it hadn't filtered through to me what your subject was.
That's good.
You
That's
see?
got
Thank
a
you
milk
very,
thing
very
in
much.
there.
There's a milk thing going on there. But it's a subject that's, I was going to say, dear to my heart, but certainly close to my family.
Yeah.
My family had two trades, really, that we were in. It was fruit and veg and it was milk.
Right.
This is a true and terrible story. Thankfully, it was a long time ago, before my time. My great-granddad, it would have been my great-granddad, died aged 41 when his milk cart with his horse tipped over onto him. Oh, that's absolutely true. God. He had a milk round in Ladbroke Grove or somewhere, and he died when he got his sustained injuries that he never recovered from. I don't think he died immediately, but he sort of died as a result of that. So that's how far back the milk goes in my family. Yeah,
I've never heard you tell that one.
Yeah,
I mean, I've heard you tell a lot of things, and the one which I'm sure you will mention about. Unless you don't want to mention it.
No, I'll mention it.
Go on. You know the one I mean,
don't you?
We'll
do it later. We'll do it in a bit. But yeah, so I'll start with the milk tragedy.
Yes.
So my family were, particularly on my dad's side, were either milkmen or they were fruit and veg sellers. That was the two
good
trades.
Good honest trades. Eh? Yeah, good. Giving people what they needed and wanted and had to live with. So that's good. Yeah, I mean, the main subject of what I'm doing is one particular milk business, and it's Express Dairy.
Yeah.
Now, I always think people say, is it Express Dairies or Express Dairy? And it is Express Dairy Company, to give it its official title. But, I mean, everybody's just changed it to what they want it to. But Express is an important one. I mean, obviously you had Express Unigate, which was formerly United Dairies. You had Co-op, and then you had lots of smaller ones. Right. But Express was a big one. It's an important one. And certainly people might be thinking, well, I don't understand this. You don't make milk, do you? It's made by cows. But the thing is, there is a production process involved in that. And certainly as we moved into the 20th century, it did become something that was more of an industry, because you had to get things processed and packaged and then sent out. It became more of a sort of science. So, before you had such a thing as sort of modern milk delivery or supermarkets, because that's where we get our milk from now, generally, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You actually, in London, cows were kept in shops or underneath shops, at the back of shops, by sort of so-called dairies, and the milk was then taken to people, but people didn't always know what they were really getting, whether it was in fact milk and what the quality was like. So it was adulterated and watered down and all sorts of really quite nasty things that I don't even want to mention that was added in. You know, even sort of lead-based things, which I think is shocking, on top of cholera and everything else that people had to deal with. But so in steps a very important figure of someone called George Barham. Now, Barham is a name that some people might know in northwest London, because there is a Barham Park, and I do think it might have been named after him. I'm not 100% sure. I should check that.
Where is it?
Wembley area.
Right, okay.
I should have done a bit of research on that. Got that pinned down, but yes. So George Barham is very important. He was a son of a dairyman. In 1864, at the age of 28, really quite young, he comes up with a better idea of how to deal with getting milk into London, it being fresh and assured, because we had the railways, and he basically struck up a deal with farmers out in northern parts of the world, like Derbyshire, etc., and bring it down on express trains. That's where you get the name from. And it was brought initially into King's Cross. And he had a sort of base at 28 Museum Street, Bloomsbury.
Which is extraordinary.
Isn't it?
It was in the middle of Bloomsbury.
I know. There was a lot of stuff in Bloomsbury. So I work in that area. I work at the University of London. And, of course, now people associate it with a lot of educational facilities that are there, but also with people like Virginia Woolf and the literary people. Yeah. And, you know, we've got all those hotels. That's a part of the world that you're familiar with,
Well, I lived in Bloomsbury for about 10 years.
Yeah, and to think that there was industry
but there was a big dairy just around the corner from where I was that was still functioning. Hunter Street, if I remember
Hunter
rightly.
Street, now. See, I was going to bring that, maybe I'll bring it in, that is with Tavistock Street.
Tavistock Street and Hunter Street meet each other, so it's the same place.
Because I'm going to beat myself a bit earlier on here, but that was actually Tavistock Street, and it was a range of addresses that I think it was a great block. It's now used by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and it was then used by, before that, the London British Transport Police, but it was originally the head office for Express Dairies, and there was a dairy round the back, the Bloomsbury Dairy, that was Express. So that may be, I don't know.
No,
possibly.
that's the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it was a dairy up until, I think, the 70s or something. I mean, I might be wrong,
it would
but
have been.
It was.
I think well past into the 80s.
Into the 80s. When I lived there was still some sort of...
Express closed their offices by then and gone to South Ruislip, so I'm taking another bit of my story away.
Anyway, let's go back.
Back a bit, but basically, so he set up at 28 Museum Street, which is not far. Obviously, the title of the street gives the clue away that it's not far from the British Museum. Very, very touristy spot now. I mean, you just can't move for tourists coming to see the British Museum. And he was quite astute to do all this because he then distributed it out of that address into central London. But a year afterwards, in 1865, there was a terrible outbreak of something called rinderpest.
What's that?
It's basically a sort of cattle plague, and it basically decimated most of the cows that were in central London that were being used by cowkeepers, etc. So he was quite wise to have done that. I don't know whether he anticipated that this was going to be happening. So he set up. He also then was a very keen inventor and innovator, and he effectively invented the conical milk churn. This is obviously to get the stuff from the farms onto the trains and then move it around. And he also looked at things like what is called the Laval cream separator, which is to separate the cream from the milk, and ways of chilling the milk. So he's a very astute man. And, I have to say, again, broadening it out a bit, I have a great love for Express Dairy. I don't know quite what it is, but it always struck me as a very decent, proper company that did things right. And its origins of that go right back to its start with George Barham. Because he'd got so involved with basically all this equipment that was required for the dairy industry, and there was a requirement that he could foresee, he set up something called the Dairy Supply Company. Now, he had a building built near the site he started off with. This is on the corner of Little Russell Street and Coptic Street.
Yep.
I meant to look up what Coptic is.
Well, it's Coptic Church. It's the Ethiopian church.
Thank you. There you go. An educated man, of course. Right. So he sets up this business there. Now, this was built in 1888. That building is still there. Okay. And there's a possibility that some of the listeners or even yourself might have gone there because, in fact, that is a Pizza Express restaurant.
I know it very well indeed. I certainly have gone there.
So
I think it was the first Pizza Express
restaurant. It was the
restaurant.
second one.
Oh, was it the second?
It was the second one. It was opened the same year as the first one, 1965, because the first one was in Wardour Street.
Right.
But I actually thought I will do a bit of homework. And so last week for lunch, I broke from work and I went to that particular establishment, and it is lovely.
It's an amazing space,
isn't it? Yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's wonderful. But the main beauty of it is the outside with all this wonderful decoration on it. So that is a bit of Express Dairy that still exists, although it was an associated business. George Barham then sort of basically expands what he's doing because he's doing extremely well because he was so astute. And he buys a farm out in Finchley, which was called Sheepdog Farm in 1868. That then becomes College Farm. Do you, as a resident of the area?
Yep, I know College Farm.
So this is, like I said,
think we went there once on a school trip.
You would have done, yeah, because it was, because Express used that right up to 73. So you would have been of an age when you would have gone there. It was still going. And it was used for education. It was done as really for an advert for the company, and they could show all the various methods. But I mean, it was a day out for a lot of people. It was a working farm, but it became increasingly more of a showpiece. And it's still there. Remarkably, I mean, the buildings are a little bit, I have to say, a bit tatty, but that is another bit of Express Dairy's history. So there's a lot of buildings there, as well as the building I mentioned before, which is where they moved to 26 to 30 Tavistock Place, a lovely building. Well, it was messed around with because they took some of it apart. That building was actually, I don't know what the name of the architect is, but he also designed the rather wonderful Imperial Hotel on Bloomsbury, which is no longer there, replaced with a sort of modern one, but the one next to it on the corner, which was the Russell Hotel, which is an incredible piece of architecture. And again, you would be familiar with that. So they didn't sort of spare money on things. They really went to town because they were a big company and they were doing extremely well. And they opened up loads of dairy shops across the country, not the country, across London, certainly. And I actually found out in my research there was one across the way from where I live in Cannons Park. There is a parade of shops that were put in when the station arrived in the 1930s. On the very end, it's a motor spares business now. It's been that since the 60s. And yesterday I thought, let's go and have a proper look at it. You know, you walk past place and I thought, I'm going to have a proper look at this. And I looked up and there's some modern tiling, but where the tiling's come off, I noticed there was some old tiling that was obviously from Express. And I'm looking at this thinking, I'll take a picture. But the bloke was working in the shop and I thought, you know, people get a bit sensitive. So I knocked on the door and I said, do you mind if I take a picture of that? He said, well, what? I said, well, because it used to be, and he almost finished with Express Dairy. And I went, yeah. He says, oh, come in, I'll show you the rest. And he points up at the ceiling. I've never been in this shop before. And it's one of these incredible white glass ceilings. Do you know what I'm talking about? You do? Oh, thank goodness, I don't have to explain
There's a
it.
word for that glass, and I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, it was obviously very popular in the 20s and 30s. And the only other time I've ever seen that was
They
in
usually
latest.
come in sort of hexagonal shapes.
Yeah, all sorts of things. Yeah, but it's a bit like a suspended ceiling where you've got a metal framework and you've got glass. It's terribly dangerous.
Sort of milk-coloured glass almost.
Yeah, exactly. And this would be illuminated inside. So he showed me all this and he went, this is the original sales desk. Because you go in and literally you can't go any further because it's all shelves. And there's this sort of L-shaped desk. And that was the original desk. And he says, there's marble tops as well. And the windows all marble top.
I mean, I sort of collect these places, and not just Express Dairies ones, but there's one just behind Warren Street. There's one...
So, I'm off there later.
There's one just behind Warren Street. There's one in Islington, just off of... I can't remember.
I think I know that one, yeah.
Which are those old sort of Welsh dairies that had those very elaborate tiles and often pictures of cows and all of that in there. I love them. They're beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I was almost thinking to myself afterwards, I thought, should I ask him, do you think the original sign is underneath? It would have said Express Dairy, you know? Maybe. But he says, he'd been there since 64. He said, we've been here 60 years.
Wow.
And I'm looking at this guy and I'm working out his age, 60 years, 1964. He said, yeah, basically Express left and we moved in. And I think, wow. You know, and that's been sitting. I've been living in Cannons Park with my wife now for the last 11 years, and I didn't realise that. So there you go. Anyway, I went off on a bit of a ramble there. But yes, they had loads and loads of these dairy shops. I mean, your part of the world, there was one at the top of, oh God, what's the name of the road that goes down from...
It's called vitrolite, that glass. Someone just told us. Yep,
Thank you very much. It acts as a good diffuser when you put light on. I assume that's the reason why, but and it's quite tough. Right, the name of the road in Burnt Oak, that's the main drag. What's that called?
Watling Avenue.
Thank you. Right, at the top of that, on the corner, there was an Express Dairy shop. It was quite a big one, I believe.
But
they were all over the place, and they were all supplied by the company. Right, so this is where we're going to move into the industry bit. By the 1920s, they decide they're going to get really industrialised because you've got a bigger market, you've got suburbs expanding, and they open up right next to the London Midland Scottish Railway line at Cricklewood on Claremont Road, their biggest and most advanced bottling dairy in the world. Wow. So they claimed. And I think they were probably right because they didn't mess around. So that's Cricklewood establishment there. It literally, you had milk trains that came in with the big tankers that came into a siding. They pumped the milk out of that. It went through to pasteurisation.
So it got pumped directly from the trains into their
Pretty much, yeah. They had pipes. They just take it out of there. I mean, these were glass-lined. This is another invention that George Barham came up with, glass-lined metal tankers that were to bring it down from where it was coming from the countryside. And yes, they pumped it, went through a whole system of operations, pasteurisation, bottling. They had bottle washing. I mean, there are pictures of this and it's incredible. And this is 1920, it's 1927 that this opened up and it was there right through until I think the late 90s. So you were mentioning about your time. Yeah. And your brother.
Well, I was never a milkman, but my brother Reggie was. He was originally fruit and veg, and then he went on the milk. So he stayed in the family trades. And he had a milk round, which was around Finchley, kind of Hendon, that bit up there.
Okay.
Not a million miles from where we were.
Right.
And I used to sometimes go out and help him, or at least that was the theory. And and this was Christmas. This was a few days before Christmas, which, if you're a milkman, is a really important time because it is when people give you a bonus. Yeah. Right? And my brother Reggie was quite a charmer, and he was quite good at getting a bonus, particularly out of the ladies of Finchley and Hendon and whatever it was. Right? So this was quite an important time for Reggie. Yeah. And I remember I'd gone out. You get up at 4:00 in the morning, and I think I'm not sure, but I think we had to go to the depot in Cricklewood to get the milk.
There you go.
And then drive from there in the milk float, one of those electric milk floats, to do the round.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was it. It's all a long time ago.
Yeah.
I was like 17 or something like that, 17, 18. Couldn't drive, by the way. Didn't have a driving licence till I was 38. So wasn't technically allowed to drive the milk float.
Right.
But obviously we're doing this thing and Reggie's running off to the houses to make sure he gets his envelope or his fiver or whatever it
His
was.
packet.
Right? So he says to me, Robert, turn the milk float round, because we were in a cul-de-sac somewhere in Finchley. And he says, turn the milk float round, and while I'm running over there and, deliver the milk and get some money. So I get in the milk float and I put my foot down on this milk float, and then I'm going forward, but because I didn't remember, it must have had reverse, but I don't know how you did it. Yeah. And basically, I drove straight into a lamppost, right? And I very slowly knocked the lamppost over. It was one of those metal ones, the metal ones with the sort of bent top. So it's the day before Christmas or the day before that. My poor brother turns around, hears this, turns around and sees this lamppost. And of course, he had to claim that he'd done it because
you shouldn't have been there.
I shouldn't have been there. So he had to go into work and say, I knocked a lamppost.
You'll never guess what. Don't take him out again.
So I think it was the last time I ever helped him on his round.
Oh, dear.
But there you are.
I was going to say, actually, I do know this, that, Five Ways Corner?
Yes.
Right. There was an express depot there, so it may be related. I don't know. It was called Tithe Farm, and this is an incredible building because they built it, whether or not it's an existing building, but it was an old barn that then had a shop on the front of it. And I don't know what it would have been like back in your youth.
I can't. To be honest,
it was all
a long time ago.
You've done a lot of stuff since then.
My memories are pretty shaky, but I will always remember.
You remember
that
knocking
day.
down the lamppost, that's for sure. So going back to the bottling plants, there were several of these. I mean, Express wasn't just in London; they moved further out. They were a big concern, and a lot of where the things were made, like cheese and yogurt and stuff, were made out further out of the London area. But they had an establishment, Bollow Lane, which is in South Acton, which is these are bottling plants, Bromley and South Morden. The one in South Morden was opened in the 50s. And that, when it closed down in 92, in 1996, it became a mosque.
Wow.
And they did a very sort of, you can see the original building. There was then a fire later on. They had a complete rebuild. So that was an interesting little story. The other big concern that opened up, I'm running out of time, I can tell, in South Ruislip. Now, that's close to me because I used to live near this place because my dad was in the Air Force and he was stationed at RF Northolt, which is very nearby. Yeah. So I remember that express place, a huge place, and it became their head office. And they made all sorts of bits and pieces like butter blending and things. There was a bottling plant there. They looked after all the big trucks.
Are there still any milkmen?
Yeah, I believe so,
some,
Robert. Yeah,
because we used to get milk delivered when in Camden Town, and I'm talking probably 10 years ago. We probably stopped, or maybe 12 years ago, when our kids stopped having, or my wife stopped having milk, or it was, and we were getting it, and it wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think there are still a few milk rounds out there.
I've seen bottles of milk outside flats and stuff. So obviously still, but I think it's more sort of up end sort of thing of it.
Yeah.
But there's a nice little story to do with South Ruislip. It's a huge place. Because it's close to RAF Northolt, I think you can guess what happened. Yeah.
What?
June the 1st, 1960, an Avro Anson, an RAF Avro Anson, which is a light transport plane, basically belly flopped on top of one of the warehouses.
No.
Yeah. And it was very fortunate. The pilot was badly cut up, but basically no one got seriously injured, but several thousand eggs were contaminated by the kerosene.
Some rather
pouring
scrambled
out.
eggs.
Yeah. And a lady working in the warehouse who got a terrible shock. So, I mean, I need to just say about the Dairy Supply Company, I mentioned it before, that was split off because the two sons of George Byron went off and did various things. The Dairy Supply Company moved out to Park Royal, and I couldn't find a lot of stuff about that. But I do know, because I used to make milk churns there, that Jet Harris of the Shadows, was an apprentice milk churn welder there in the 1950s. So that's another little thing. So I do like chucking these in. Sometimes it becomes almost more important than the rest of it. But and so you want to know about what happened to Express Dairies because everybody assumes they're still there. They are not. They are not. And they had a very checkered end of life. They were bought in 1969 by Grand Metropolitan, which is a big group. Then Northern Foods in 1991, and it got passed around, and eventually it all got broken up, and it doesn't exist. By basically, I would say 2003, that was pretty much it, and it was always there.
There's the story, a fantastic story of Express Dairies, as told by Mark Amis. Mark, as ever, sir, thank you very, very much.